The date is July 16, 1054. Cardinal Humbert, representing the delegation of the Catholic Church, enters the Hagia Sophia Church and places a document in front of Michael, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who is preparing for a ceremony. He then leaves Hagia Sophia, departs Constantinople, and returns to Rome. The document that Humbert placed in front of the Patriarch declared that the Patriarch had been excommunicated by the Archbishop of Rome, that is, the Pope. On the same day, the Patriarch convened a church council and excommunicated those who had excommunicated him. Thus, the date July 16, 1054 was recorded as the date on which the Western and Eastern churches officially separated from one another. According to historians, this Great Schism was not a sudden event. The roots of the events that caused the separation of the two churches actually went back hundreds of years. Throughout the Middle Ages, one of the main topics of debate among Christian clergy was which church possessed universal supremacy. The archbishops of Rome, that is, the popes, argued that supremacy belonged to the Western Church, because one of Jesus' apostles, Peter, had come to Rome, founded a church there, and was martyred there. According to the papacy's claim, Peter was the first archbishop of Rome, and those who came after him sat in the papal office as his representatives. Jesus himself had pointed to Peter as the founder of the church. In addition, Paul, who made great efforts in spreading Christianity, had also come to Rome and was martyred there just like Peter. According to the Western Church, the bones of both were buried beneath a church in the Vatican. In other words, the Roman Church rose over the two greatest martyrs of Christianity. According to the papacy, all of this was proof of the universal supremacy of the Archbishopric of Rome. In contrast, the Eastern Church explained its supremacy with a more worldly approach. Constantinople was the capital of the empire and the place where the emperor resided. In the pre-Christian Roman religion, emperors were regarded as the head of religious authority. This tradition continued after the capital of the empire was moved to Constantinople in the 4th century. That is, emperors such as Constantine, Theodosius, and Justinian had authority in religious matters. In fact, for the Eastern Church, the issue was quite simple. According to them, wherever the emperor was, the church there should be superior to all other churches. This struggle for supremacy, which continued throughout the Middle Ages, played an important role in widening the rift between the Eastern and Western churches. The issue here was not actually about whose justifications were more reasonable. Both churches wanted to have power over the other. From what we have explained so far, the cause of the conflict appears to be political rather than religious, but there was also a cultural dimension to the matter. By the year 1054, there were some fundamental differences between the two churches that had existed for many years. Although some of these seem simple, they would eventually play a role in the division. For example, in the Eastern Church it had become a tradition for the clergy to grow beards, whereas there was no such tradition in the Western Church. In the Eastern Church, clergy could marry, whereas in the Western Church they could not. However, these were not the biggest problems between the two churches. When the Roman Empire was divided into two in 395, the borders that emerged were not only political but also cultural. In the West, Latin culture was dominant, while in the East, Greek, that is, Hellenic culture, was dominant. The official language used by the Western Church was Latin, whereas the language used in the Eastern Church was Greek. From the 5th century onward, even emperors abandoned Latin and began to speak and write in Greek. Over time, language became a major problem between the two churches because they could not be aware of the theological debates taking place. For example, in the 5th century, a letter sent to Constantinople remained unanswered for months in Rome because there was no one to translate it. The same was true for Constantinople. Letters sent from Rome were in Latin and were despised and not considered worthy of translation. By the 9th century, some clergy in the Eastern Church claimed that the Pope spoke the language of barbarians and said that he should never establish authority over Constantinople. Another topic of dispute concerned the doctrine of the Trinity. That is, the formula of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the early years of Christianity, emperors organized a series of councils to achieve consensus on religiously controversial issues. These councils were meetings where high-ranking clergy gathered to discuss religious matters. The first of these was convened in 325 by Emperor Constantine in Nicaea, that is Nick. The formula of the Trinity was clarified at the Council of Constantinople held in 381. According to this, the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father, that is, from God. However, at the Council of Toledo held in 589, the Western Church changed this and accepted that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father and the Son, that is, from Jesus. The reason for doing this was to increase the importance attributed to Jesus. In this way, they believed they would protect Jesus from heretical views. At first, this did not create a problem between the two churches, because due to the language problem mentioned earlier, the Eastern Church learned of this decision years later. However, when they did learn of it, their stance was clear. According to them, this was heresy. Historians call this issue the Filioque problem. The Latin term means, and from the Son. In the early periods of Christianity, there was no hierarchy among the churches. Their relationship was generally at the level of exchanging information. However, with the decisions taken at general councils, 5 churches were considered superior to the others and gained certain authorities over the churches in their regions. These were, respectively, the churches of Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. Eastern clergy called this system the pentarchy, that is, fivefold rule. In its early years, the Archbishopric of Rome was accepted as having precedence over the others. But over time, emperors began to increase the importance of Constantinople and sought to gain greater religious authority by drawing other regional patriarchs to their side. This inevitably deepened the separation between East and West. In the early years, popes had to submit to the political power of the emperors. In fact, imperial support was required to become pope. This situation continued for several centuries. In 726 AD, the Eastern Roman Emperor Leo III banned the veneration of images and icons of Jesus and the saints. This practice, called iconoclasm, was strongly opposed by Pope Gregory II, who wrote a letter declaring that he excommunicated everyone involved in this movement. However, since the messengers were arrested in Sicily, which was under Eastern Roman control, the letter never reached Constantinople. In 751, when the Lombards captured several cities in northern Italy and began to threaten Rome, a new chapter opened in the history of the Catholic Church. The Pope requested help from the Frankish king Pepin the Short against the Lombards. Pepin, a devout man, gladly accepted this call, entered Italy with his army, and defeated the Lombards. Pepin's generosity did not end there. He announced that he was donating the lands stretching from Rome to Ravenna to the papacy. Thus, the Pope became not only the sole religious authority in the West but also the ruler of a state located in central Italy. This was a turning point in Christian history. The process continued in the year 800 when Pepin's son, Charlemagne, was declared emperor by the Pope. At the same time, the Eastern Roman throne was occupied by Empress Irene, that is, a woman. The commonly accepted belief was that the emperor had to be male. With Charlemagne's coronation, the emperor now resided in the West, and theoretically supremacy had passed to the West. Although Irene was deposed in 802 and Nikephoros was declared emperor, neither the papacy nor the Franks agreed to relinquish their claim to the imperial title. This naturally led to a further deepening of the division. However, The event that finally severed the ties would occur shortly after the Normans conquered southern Italy. Previously, a large part of southern Italy had been under Eastern Roman rule. From the 11th century onward, these regions gradually fell into the hands of the Normans, who were loyal to the Catholic Church. But there was a problem. The churches there continued to apply the rites according to Eastern traditions. In 1053, the Pope issued a decree making it mandatory for these churches to adopt Latin rites. Otherwise, all would be closed. This decision was met with anger in the East, and in retaliation, the Patriarch announced that all Latin churches in Constantinople would be closed. The disagreement between the two churches suddenly changed dimension and turned into a diplomatic crisis. In order to find a middle ground, the Pope sent a delegation led by the French Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople in June 1054. The negotiations between Cardinal Humbert and Patriarch Michael went negatively from the very beginning. Humbert presented a letter advising Michael to submit to papal authority. In addition, the cardinal's condescending attitude during the talks greatly disturbed Michael. After this, Michael refused to receive the Roman delegation for a long time. The cardinals remained in Constantinople for several more weeks. Finally, angered by the treatment he received, Humbert entered Hagia Sophia on the morning of July 16th and placed the excommunication document sealed by the Pope on the altar in front of the Patriarch. This was the final straw. With the support of the clergy, the Patriarch first excommunicated Cardinal Humbert and then the entire delegation that had come with him. With this decision, the Eastern and Western churches were now completely separated from one another. At first, the general public was not greatly affected by this situation, and Western and Eastern Christians continued their good relations in regions where they lived together. However, over time, the tension between the churches also drove the people apart. With the Crusades, conflicts between the peoples intensified, and in 1204, when the Latins captured Constantinople, this conflict reached its peak. Over the years, attempts to reconcile the churches mostly remained inconclusive. And this problem between the Eastern and Western churches has not been resolved even today.